everyone, and welcome back to this episode of In Lay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Askari, and today I have one of my old friends, Mr. Arjun Datta. How are you?
Good afternoon, Payman. I'm doing good. Things are good. Can't complain. It's a spring, so yeah, optimism, positivity, everything's in the air.
I'm glad to hear that. Arjun, you and I, we've known each other for several decades, and this episode has been several months in the making now. So,
Absolutely, it's 20 years. We've known each other for at least 20 years. And there was a while when we both moved, went in our own direction, so we didn't talk to each other for a while. But now we're like reconnecting, and we've reconnected, and it's been great to catch up.
so Arjun, how about let the audience know who you are, and you can go back as far back as you want, like where you were born, or where you went,
Yeah,
where you
sure.
went to school.
Yeah, sure. So, um, I guess I'll just kind of go like reverse chronologically. So I currently live in the Greater Toronto area. I work in the finance sector in Toronto, and I've been doing that for just over a decade. I went to school in Ontario, undergrad at York, MBA at Western, and I'm of Indian background. I moved here as an immigrant when I was a teenager, just to start university with my family. We're from the eastern part of India, but going back and further, actually, I was born in Zambia because my parents were expats. They lived there for a couple of years, so I'm from all over the place.
Pretty interesting. How old were you when you came to Canada?
I was 18.
I can't tell based on your accent.
Yeah, I mean, I think I do get that a lot. I think so. Even though I'm from India and I went to boarding school in India, my parents and I we used to live on an expatriate compound in Saudi Arabia, which was actually built for um, American and Canadian um, expats who would work in the oil patch. So things like engineers and scientists and whatnot, who'd work in Saudi Arabia in the oil sector. So I grew up with a lot of North Americans. I guess the first school I went to was, I mean, it was like a transplant school over there. So I think that's why my intonation is not that different from someone who grew up over here. But definitely my accent changes. I think the way I pronounce certain words changes. Like if I'm sitting and talking to people who have just let's say moved from India and who have like a very strong Queen's English accent, I think that comes out a little bit more then. But it's sure. I mean, my accent is pretty indistinguishable from the mainstream, I would say.
I feel bad now. I told everyone that we're good friends and we've known each other for decades, and I don't know anything about you.
Well, I mean, it's been 20 years since we last spoke, and I don't know how much detail we went into. Like in university, let's face it, we're both studying computer science. We're both just basically trying to survive, right? And the little bit of brain power we had left was where's the cheap booze at? And how can we? What are we doing Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night? That kind of stuff, right? So we had no time for like, where are you from? Who are you really? Why do you sound funny? We didn't care. So, and nor did we have the time. So it totally makes sense.
Yeah, typical topical conversation of college grads. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
So Arjun, we'll probably come back to your upbringing. That's actually pretty fascinating, like how your parents got here. But and this is going to be more of a casual conversation
Yeah.
today. So there's no single topic, but I kind of wanted to pick up where we left off last time, even though the internet gods kind of shredded my bandwidth and we had to cancel. But we were talking about housing. So why don't we? I'm going to ask you an open-ended question and try your best to answer it, and then we'll go from there. Like, what's your view on housing in Canada right now?
Uh, my view is that it's pretty abysmal. Um, the housing sector is completely skewed. Um, Prices are, although there's been a slight tapering over the last couple of months, they've generally been out of control for several years, and they've been on an increasing trajectory, more so than you would expect for the last decade and a half. Um, and I think honestly, it's complete mismatch between demand and supply.
So you think it's obviously there's no one reason, but you think it's just principally, or you think a big part of it or one part of it is the fact that there's more people buying and there's not enough homes.
That's exactly it. I mean, so when I say there's a mismatch between demand and supply, that's like the high level, sort of the one lines reason why, but there's many reasons why supply is so low. There's many reasons, and there's many reasons why demand is so high, and they're not all interconnected. So, we can delve into that a little bit, but there's multiple factors that are affecting both sides, and together they've created the problems that we're seeing in the housing sector, specifically in the big urban areas, right? So GTA, Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, even in Montreal. So it's just, yes, that's basically the reason why it's happening.
So a question, it's not mutually exclusive from what you said, supply and demand, but this concept of you have rampant inflation, you don't trust money, so you want to park your money somewhere safe. I think you guys call it a hedge against inflation. How much of that is it like the middle class parking their money in real estate is related to that supply demand?
There's some of it for sure. I would actually go one step further and say it's like not just the middle class, it's also um, the middle class and above. So like the upper middle class, like people who are, let's say in the top, I don't know, 5%, 2%, 1% of incomes in Canada, to same distributions as top 5% wealthiest people in Canada, like they're doing it as well. And exactly for that reason. And that's further driving up demand because now they're getting into the housing market not because of shelter, but because of they're treating it as a financial product, financial asset, primarily.
No. I'm going to tie that into something else. Have you been following gold?
I have been. I think it's like what 2,600. I think I'm not like loosely. It's shot up right the last I think 5 months or so. It's at what like a 3-year peak or something, if not more.
I think it's a historic peak.
Oh, it's a historic peak. Sorry, yeah, like definitely. It's yeah. It was range bound. I think between 12 and 1,600 or 12 and 1,800 for a while. And yeah, it's like 2,600 or something. It's crazy. Yeah. So yes, I have loosely been following it, and I think I know where you're going with this. Exact same reason. It has value because it's finite and it holds its value over time.
I was talking to my friend last night, and we reached the conclusion that people are desperate because the world is going to blank. and
Yes, I think that's a large part of it. There's a lot of pre-apocalyptic thinking that is causing people to. I think there's a term for it: flight to security. So when things are uncertain, people tend to buy things that provide security. So they'll park their money in hard assets. It used to be the U.S. dollar back in the day, gold, things like that. Yeah.
I see it happening with Bitcoin as well. It shot up to like 75,000. I think it's down to 72.
Yeah, no. It's the third of three peaks it's had over the last 5 years, right? So yes, for the same reason, it's the store of value.
It's like every time Joe Biden or Anthony Blinken open their mouth and say they're going to do something stupid, I run and I check the price of Bitcoin.
Boom, it goes up. I agree completely. I think those are that's the word I'm looking for. Those are leading indicators if there ever were one. If there ever were leading indicators, yeah.
So you don't need
Within seconds, right? Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to read the Wall Street Journal to know if the U.S. is doing something. Yeah.
None of that, exactly.
Um, I guess going back to housing, what are your thoughts on so much of the money? I'm calling it the middle class, but anybody in Canada, like they're investing everything in housing. If the government tries to tackle that and make housing more affordable, do you think they'd risk imploding the economy?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think there's two things there. I don't think the government would risk imploding the economy if they feel, and I think they feel that, taking aggressive corrective measures against the housing sector would do that. But I also do think that you can fix the housing sector without blowing up the economy. Sure, some people will see a correction. Sorry, some people will see an erosion of wealth because of a correction in the housing market, yes. But across the board, if housing affordability goes up, that'll be a net positive for the economy as a whole. So you can do both those things. And I think it's very archaic to think that, oh, well, if we make housing more affordable by fixing some of the supply issues or fixing some of the demand issues, it's all going to go to hell because it won't. It's unlikely to.
Again, you're the expert, so walk me through.
I would say I'm the expert, but I mean, I have an opinion. Let's just start there. I have an opinion.
You have an informed opinion.
Oh,
So,
okay. Well, sure. Yes.
like, if somebody got a mortgage for a property that's worth $1 million, and
Yeah.
then the market corrects, now the property value hypothetically drops down to $500,000.
Yes.
Where would they lose money, or how would that impact them?
Yeah. So they'd
Assume I
obviously.
don't know anything about mortgages.
Yeah. Yeah. No. So obviously, so let's say it's $1 million property, and let's say you put 20% down, so you have $200,000 that you paid, and you take a mortgage for $800,000, which is 1 million minus 200,000 your down payment. Okay, then something happens, and the property is now $500,000. So yeah, so you have what's called negative equity because you owe more on the house, right? The balance of your mortgage, 800,000, is more than what the house is now worth, right? So yeah, that's obviously a bad thing. That's terrible. But the problem is that those kinds of corrections, like $1 million house going into $500,000, it it's unlikely to happen if you take corrective measures to fix housing construction, to fix the supply side. A lot of the reasons why we're seeing corrections like that happening is because people are buying overvalued houses at the peak. So specifically, if you look at, I mean, you go to House Sigma, or there's a bunch of like sites on X which actually actively follow this. Last year, actually, no, sorry, we're now in 2024. So in 2022, I would say the first 6 months of 2022, I think that was the second half of 2021 and the first half of 2022, just when the interest rate started increasing. That was the peak of the most recent housing asset bubble. Housing prices are out of control. I mean, with all due respect to the Niagara Peninsula, people were buying houses in the middle of nowhere in the Niagara Peninsula for like $1.5 million. Like that house, I'm sorry, is not worth that much money. You're buying, like, it is being sold, it's being transacted for that value because there were people who were willing to pay that, right? So there was a complete disconnect between the value of a property and what someone is willing to pay for the price, right? Now, this is happening all the time. People who went in and bought houses at that peak, at that point in time, because interest rates have gone up and they've been unable to keep up with the mortgages, they are now choosing to sell it. They're like, oh, I can't service this debt anymore. But now people are like, well, I'll buy the house from you. Or the banks are like, no, we're going to force the house being sold because we want to recover money. But there's no one who's going to pay $1.5 million for that house that they overpaid for back in the day. So you see all these accounts, you see all these stories of people selling a $1.5 million house for 1.2 or 1, so they're losing $500,000, $600,000 on the value of the house. Sure, but that's because they paid too much for the house to begin with during a period of ridiculous speculation. And I think we're slowly seeing the end of that, at least temporarily. So now let's say someone buys $1 million house, provided, you have to look at the comparables in the neighborhood and all this other stuff, right? If everything else in the neighborhood is selling for 800,000 and you're like, no, I'm going to buy this for 1.5, you're obviously not doing a smart thing because you're paying so much more than what the median is in that neighborhood, right? But let's say it's all $800,000 in that neighborhood. They go in and pay $1 million for a house. Sure, it's a little bit more. But then let's say hypothetically something happens and a lot more houses are being built, et cetera, and so forth. The price will correct, but it's not going to go from 1 million down to 500,000. It might go from 1 million down to that he paid to like 850 or 900 or something like that. Because the thing with housing is that yes, you need like more houses that are out there. It matches demand and prices go down, but it's all location, right? We hear about this in real estate: location, location, location. If I buy a house in Rosedale, or Lawrence Park, some of the more prestigious neighborhoods in Toronto, doesn't really matter how much I paid for it, provided I didn't pay way more than what the median is. It will hold its value because these are prestige locations that people always want to buy in. If I buy a house in the middle of Sticksville, Southern Ontario, I don't know if there's an actual Sticksville. People from Sticksville, if you're watching this show, I mean, I have nothing but love for you. I think it's a great place. But if you buy a house that you're ridiculously overpaying for in Sticksville, Ontario, that will completely get blown out of the water. You will see a massive devaluation if 1,000 new houses get built over there. And that's the other thing too, right? When you build new houses, which I think we should across the board everywhere, you can only build them in places that don't already have houses. It's obvious, right? And you're also unlikely to go into a neighborhood which has, let's say, 1,000 detached homes and say, you know what, I'm going to like level all of them and instead build 500, 400 unit towers. That's also unlikely to happen. So with the exception of targeted high density growth in cities, especially in the downtown or downtown adjacent areas, all the new detached homes, which are the most expensive houses out there, are all being built in like the suburbs and the suburbs of the suburbs and around the bigger, the big urban conurbations. That's great because that will alleviate housing supply. It'll improve housing affordability without necessarily affecting the prices of houses closer to the core. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes perfect sense. It's kind of a simple question I have, but take your time in answering it. Is it a matter of personal responsibility? Like these people that speculated, overpaid, and now they get wiped out. Is it sort of like we feel sorry for you, but it's your own fault, or do you think there's someone else to blame?
No, it's completely their own fault. If you're buying a second or a third property and you're paying way more than you should for it, and I say you should because these numbers are out there. Like judging a house price isn't rocket science. You have to look at the location, you look at the comparables, you look at what other houses in that area have transacted for. You look at the house itself, square footage, lot size, detached, semi-detached, how many bedrooms does it have, all this stuff. And you can get a fairly good understanding of what the house is actually worth. And we live in a day and age when all this information is available online for free. House Sigma, it's a great site. I think you can just log in using your Google or Yahoo or whatever, like any other account. There's probably other sites out there. I just don't know. I use House Sigma. You shouldn't be, overpaying for a house. And if you do, because it's your second or third property and you're trying to invest in it, absolutely, like any other financial security, you are open to the risks. And if you get wiped out because you did something like that, I'm sorry, but that's your fault.
Well, we'll put your email and phone number in the details so you can get some hate responses.
There you go. I expect my mailbox to blow up with all the hate mail.
Here's another statistic for you. I saw the other day. In 1980, this is the number of years salary to buy a home. In 1980, it was 3. 2022 was 7.
7, yes. Yeah.
So to me, that means the Canadians have gotten over two times more poor in the last 40 years.
Correct, with regards to housing affordable. Well, I would say yes, but I would say the other way. Houses have gotten 2.5 times more expensive over the last 40 years, right? No, that's exactly it, because that goes back to that other conversation thing you and I had about wage growth versus housing price growth, right? Like wages have increased at a certain rate. I forget what the number is, close to inflation, maybe a little bit lower, but housing prices have gone through the roof, and that's the demand side, right? Like there's just so many more people who are trying to buy houses. Part of it is immigration, it's true. Part of it is foreigners who come in and they buy houses because it's a great way to park their money and move it away from regimes where they could lose that money, right? But also a lot of it is the Gen X millennial generation transfer, right? So boomers are retiring. The parents of Gen X and the parents of millennials are retiring, and their kids are buying houses, their first houses, right? Like they're over the late 90s through now. They're moving out. They're buying their first houses. So there's all this pressure being created on the housing market.
So I have a question about foreign money.
Yeah.
I have kind of conflicting views. On the one hand, I think we should be attracting as much investment as possible within reason, not drug money, but foreign money. On the other hand, I understand that land is a little bit different than, a stock or a business because people live there. What would your solution be? Like, should we come up with a federal program where we say, we'll take your money, but we'll put it in a fund or something?
That's actually not a bad idea. I never really thought about that. But I think to answer your question, I think the first thing is what we should do. Like, like foreign direct investment is a huge way to grow the economy. We should absolutely be attracting capital from around the world to invest in assets that generate income for Canadians. So if you want to invest in a factory, if you want to invest in a farm or I don't know, a manufacturing facility, which is a factory, I'm sorry, but things that create wealth, things that create things that we can export and sell and we can increase our exports. Absolutely. I mean, within reason. We don't want to sell off all our assets to foreign buyers either. But if people are coming in and they want to invest in putting together plants and factories, absolutely that should be looked at. We should not be attracting capital to be parked in the housing sector because of all the reasons we've spoken to, and because I feel it's true. Shelter is a basic right. Everyone needs somewhere to live, right? So, yeah, if that's a question you're asking, I completely agree with you. Now,
So
there's
here's
many ways of doing this, but a fund is not a bad idea. But I think it's just sorry, I think I cut you off. I think the main thing is if you're not a Canadian citizen and you're buying a house, there needs to be due diligence. Like, okay, you as a foreigner, as a non-Canadian, like, why are you buying this property? Do you own anything else? You need to check all the different shell companies. How many other houses do you own? And what, like, why? So there should be a cap. So all these things, right? For sure.
um, and just I think I overlooked something previously when I said 3 years worth of income to 7. That means people have gotten 2 times poorer. It could also mean that the quality of the homes are. I think you and I talked about this. Now the requirements, like every kid has to have a bathroom in their room. It's not like the old days. So that could also be that where our expectations are higher.
Yeah, so that's true. I think that's a big part of it too. I know I've heard a lot of people that I know personally who are like, oh, I'm having a kid, I need to move out and get a new house. I'm like, dude, you have 4 bedrooms in your house. I don't understand. Like, you have 3 extra bedrooms. Why do you need another house just because you're having one kid, right? So yes, right. But I think like that 7x increase, right? Sorry, that 7x multiple. A lot of it is not just driven by the value or the price of a new home, because that's gone up too. It's more expensive, and I'll talk about that in a second. It's more expensive to build new construction. It's true, but again, a lot of it is just that houses are transacting at prices which are much higher because it's like you have 15 bidders for every house, whereas earlier in the night that in 1980 you probably had maybe 2, maybe 3. I don't know, and the prices are completely out of whack with the value. So it's both those things, right?
So another thing that's kind of complicated.
Yeah.
I think we're going to go back and watch this episode, and we're going to be like, "What the hell? We're all over the place. There's seemingly no reason." But somebody went and they looked at the price of Canadian houses over the last 20 years, not based on dollars, but based on ounces of gold, and they found that the price of housing, it hasn't increased. It's stayed the same. It's actually gone down since 2001, I think.
Okay, but does that account for the most recent spike in gold prices? Because gold prices almost doubled, right? So that would create a little bit of a um, that would hide it would obscure some of that analysis. Like, I'd be curious to see if it was from the study from when it started to 2021, let's say, or 2020, when gold was still 1600 or something, 1400. I forget.
So I should mention I didn't have much faith in this guy's data.
Yeah.
He said it stayed the same, but like if you look at the housing prices in Canada, they've shot up. If you look at the price of gold, it went up really, really quickly until 2011, and it hasn't really changed much since 2011. So I don't know how he did it, but he still came up with the conclusion that the price of houses has not really gone up. He's saying it's inflation related.
Interesting. So let's think about this for a second. So, look, I mean, the analysis is the analysis. I think I may have found this. I'm just Googling this. Is it from someone? Is it DanielAmerman.com, I guess? I think he's the person who did this. Gold to housing ratio as a valuation indicator. I'd have to dig into it a little bit more. But I don't. So there's a couple of things. Like, yeah, sure. That on its own doesn't necessarily mean that housing prices are not out of control. That's what I would say first. Is it all inflation? So yeah, some of it, sure, because
I can see the hamster wheel spinning.
Yeah, no, just like I'm trying to say it in a very simple way. If there's just more money floating around and people are willing to spend more of it and use more of it to buy a house, and obviously prices are going to go up because people are going to bid more, right? And I don't know if that necessarily is purely inflation related. A lot of it is also because of cheap debt, right? Like for the longest time, I think from 2010, I think maybe I forget, to 2018, the BOC rate was close to 2%, right? It was close to 2%, maybe a little bit lower, maybe a little bit higher, but generally it was 2% for the longest time. Then you had the end of the commodity super cycle in 2014. It went down a little bit. And then, 2020, it just, like, because of COVID, like it went down to, I think, 0.5% or something. But the point is, interest rates had been very, very low in Canada for a very long period of time, which means money, like, it was very cheap to borrow money. And the cheaper the money is to borrow, people are going to say, well, I'm going to take out a mortgage that's like $1.5 million because, it's 2%. I'm fine with it, or 3%. I'm fine with it. But now the rates are going back up, and that same mortgage is now, I mean, you've paid off some of it, but interest rates are like 5 or 6 or 7%. Obviously, that's like a huge crunch because money is more expensive now. So there's like less of it that people are willing to put towards a house purchase. So that's going to correct some of the prices because people aren't going to bid crazy numbers. So I think cheap debt played a big part of it. Inflation too, right? But I'm loath, without going into it further, I'm loath to generalize and say that the number one, housing value to go, like, in ounces of gold has stayed relatively constant, like that. I need to think about that a little more. I don't think that leads to any generalizations, but I'm also loath to say that it's just purely inflation. I think there's other factors in there too.
Yeah, it's multi-factor. It's not something simple. Yeah.
It's not. And the other thing I just want to mention is that, like, when inflation goes up, central banks, they have to raise their central bank rates to match what they think or where they think inflation is going to be, because otherwise your money is losing value over time. If you're getting 2% on the money deposited at a bank, but your inflation is 8%, you're technically, I'm putting it simply, you're losing 6% over time. So they have to raise interest rates. So then you get to a stage where inflation is high, interest rates are also high, and then there's a little bit of a feedback loop and everything. And you just hope that over time you're cooling off the economy and inflation goes down, and then things get a little bit better. And then you can lower interest rates. So there's a lot of things that are all interconnected and often are very iterative going on in the background.
I I'm, I'm reminded of something of Vivek Ramaswamy, the
Oh, yeah,
presidential
yeah.
candidate. He said
Yes.
about money. They asked him about inflation. He goes, "Money should only really serve one purpose. It should be a ruler, like a measuring tape for value." And he goes, I can't remember
Yeah.
how he worded it, but he said if it's made out of like silly putty, something like a stretch and
He's absolutely
shrink.
right. He's absolutely right.
So,
Right.
the reason I bring that up is you were trying to figure out like how inflation impacts housing, but like the price of housing is inflation. So it's
Yes.
really
Yeah.
hard to think about it.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. And I think some of that also is tied into. I mean, what he said. I vaguely remember the speech that he gave. He's a very sharp guy. He's very articulate. I enjoyed listening to him talk. At some point in the 70s, and I forget, you'd have to ask an economist, they would know this. At some point in the 70s, the US said that we're moving away from the gold standard. So, put loosely, up until that point, sorry, was it the 70s? I think it may have been a little bit early. Anyway, point is, for the longest time, the amount of gold bullion reserves that a country had, and it's like central bank reserves, was tied to the amount of money, currency, fiat money, that you had floating around that it could issue. And that's fine. But then at some point, the US said that, no, we're uncoupling the two. The amount of money that we have in circulation is completely different and is uncoupled to the amount of gold that we have. So that allowed the money supply to expand like massively, right? And the problem is that when that happens, you as a person, your annual salary or your hourly wage automatically over time, unless it increases at the same rate, loses value. And the most direct example of that is, you know, you were 3.5 years wages away from buying a house before. Now you're 7.5, right? Some of that is demand, of course, but some of that is also the money supply is increasing. Because if you take that graph back even further to the 50s and 60s, I'm sure it was even closer. It may have been like 2 times or 1.8 times or something. I don't know. But that's the other thing too. And when you expand the money supply, it really benefits people who can take on a lot of leverage. It's not really people like you and me. It's corporations, you know, companies who have big balance sheets because they can borrow lots of money, and they can use that to grow it and become even bigger and drive profit. So it helps it helps grease the wheels of the economy, but at a certain point, people's wages are no longer growing as fast as the money supply is, and that's a bad thing.
Can we do a little, just like a thought experiment here? So,
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
let's go with low interest rates. So everybody says like when the interest rates are low, the rich can, it benefits the rich. So let's say I'm a homeless guy,
Yeah,
and you're a bank, and the interest rate is 0.5%.
yeah.
So that's an easy example. I come to you, and I say, "Can I get a mortgage for $1 million?" And I'm going to go buy an apartment and rent it out, and I'll pay the half back. You're probably going to say no because I'm homeless, right? But
Correct. That's exactly it. You're not. So, just to be clear, it's not just that you're homeless or because you're homeless. It's because as a homeless person, I feel you have no credit worthiness.
okay, so I think the way the bank would word that is they just say, "Okay, you have to put 200,000 down," and obviously that's kind of like saying buzz
Yeah,
off,
obviously,
right?
right. But it's not even that. It's like even if you put 200,000 down, can you service this mortgage going forward? Because if you're a homeless guy, I mean, okay, it could be that you do have an income and you choose to be homeless, which is, since you're doing a thought experiment, it's possible, but it's extremely unlikely. But fundamentally, I would say, okay, in addition to the down payment, are you able to service this debt? That's really what it comes down to.
Okay, that's what I wanted to touch on, but in a just like a broken down everyday language. So now me, Payman Ascari, I'll just assume I'm retired. I come to you and I say, "Hey, Bank of Arjun, I have $200,000. Can you give me $800,000 loan? And I'm going to go buy this apartment, and the interest payment is 4,000 a month. I can rent it out for 5,000, and I'll pay you back." I think banks would still say no, right? They'd ask for an income.
So, because you said you're retired, it makes it a little bit more interesting, I think. So, as a retired person, I believe there's old age security and there's stuff you get from the government, right? Like your CPP. You get old age security and all this other stuff. Okay, so you have some income technically, but more importantly, as a retired person, just part of this thought experiment. The first thing I would assume as a banker is, okay, do you have some assets? Like you're retired, probably you have a house or two that you've paid off. You probably have an RSP somewhere. Like you have assets which I can use as security against the loan. So if you don't have a job, obviously it makes it much more unlikely for me to give you a loan, but that unlikeliness is reduced somewhat depending on your financial picture. Like if you have $2.5 million in assets lying around and you ask me for $800,000, maybe I could swing it. It depends on my policies and my tolerance for risk. As a retired person, I'm saying. But if you're retired and you have like nothing, right, and you're like still renting or something, or whatever, like there's lots of people who retire and they don't own a house or they don't have a lot of assets. And maybe this is where you're going. I would probably consider your credit worthiness to be similar to that of a homeless person, because I'm like, I'm not convinced that you can carry this debt, irrespective of whether you can flip it and for a profit every month, right? Because it's not how it works.
I'm thinking in terms of going back to what I said. Like everyone says that low interest rates, the rich know how to use it, but the poor don't. So
Correct.
you have, if you buy $1 million apartment, I'm making these numbers up, but
Yeah,
the debt
no. Yeah.
to service the interest is 4,000 a month. You can rent it out for 5,000. Like, what difference does it make if you have somebody who's making $50,000 a year asking for that, or somebody who's $1 billion net worth?
Yeah, no. You're right. So the difference is this: the person with $1 billion net worth not only has assets that they can liquefy or liquidate. Sorry, not liquefy, liquidate. Sorry, in order to service the debt if things were to go south. So we're always thinking worst case scenario, right? How to deal with the worst case scenario. Worst case scenario, you can no longer rent it at $5,000 a month. Worst case scenario, your renter says, "Screw this, I'm declaring bankruptcy," so you can't even go after them. A worst case scenario, like there's a fire in the apartment or something and you cannot rent it out anymore, but you still have to pay money on, like whatever, and insurance doesn't cover it. In those scenarios, I'm far more comfortable thinking about the repayability of the loan by a person who has $1 billion than someone who's making 50,000 a year. That's basically what it comes down to.
Okay, so let me rephrase
And that's
that
the
then.
advantage that the rich people have or rich corporations have.
I think I understand you. I just want to rephrase it for the audience. Uh, when you're, it's easier giving a mortgage is a loan, giving a loan to a rich person because either they can dig into their pockets, their salary, or they can just sell one of their beach houses and pay back the bank if things go tits up. Is that right?
Correct. Exactly it. Correct.
Okay. Yeah.
And
It's always the poor.
yeah, and that's exactly it, right? Like that's the problem. The benefits of low interest rates or the benefits of various other things disproportionately accrue to people who are already wealthy or entities who are already wealthy. Like one of the things, for example, just quick sidebar, one of the things happening right now, and I don't know the numbers, I've been reading about it, and someone would just have to probably do a little bit of research, more research into it. But there are private equity companies, I think BlackRock's one of them, for example, that are coming in and through subsidiary companies, they're buying up Canadian real estate, they're buying up houses, and then they're turning into slumlords. They're buying up detached houses, neighborhoods at a time, and then why are they doing this? So that they can rent them out, right? So, but see, what's happening is that that's bad because obviously, like home ownership is declining, and you're turning a lot of people who are, maybe at the bottom end or the cusp of ownership into renters for life. That's what you're doing, and also you can't compete because BlackRock has extremely deep pockets, so they can totally outbid anyone they want to buy a house or to buy a property, and they can also do this in volume. Like for most middle class Canadians, now they cannot buy a second house, right? But let's say hypothetically, 5, 10 years ago, when interest rates are lower, they could consider buying a second property as an investment, let's say, but maybe one, maybe two. That's it. BlackRock and all these other private equity companies, they can come in, they're buying hundreds of houses every month, probably more. I'm just taking a loose number. I don't think it's thousands, but they're buying a large volume of houses and turning them into rental properties. That, to answer your question from back, is we cannot allow that to happen at all. I'm sorry. If you are a private company or if you are if you're an institution, you cannot come in and buy houses like that. You just can't. That should be a rule.
What do you think about this? I've been thinking about the difference between um, getting like the source of your poverty versus the symptoms. So I
Interesting.
wonder,
Okay.
like, how much of it is people are just getting poorer. It's not like BlackRock comes and buys these houses and then people are like, "Oh my God, I got all these millions of dollars in loose cash. What am I going to do with this money?" like I think it's on both sides. What's your view?
Yeah. So I agree with you. I do think it's on both sides. But so I don't know what people are doing. Like people who are selling their houses, are they just moving further away where houses are cheaper and they're, using the proceeds from the house sale to buy another house? I don't know. The data, I've not looked into the data. I don't know if it's available. Um, I also don't know how much, like, who is BlackRock bidding against, right? Like, are they, you know, you put a for sale sign up on your neighbor's property, and then like 8 or 9 people come and they're like, "Oh, we really like this house. Here's our bid. Whatever we're gonna think about." And then BlackRock comes in and is like, "Screw all of you. I'm gonna like pay way more." It's like those movies or those shows about two people like at an auction, and one guy's like, "Screw this, $1 million," and you're like, "Dude, it's like a tiny piece of Greek porcelain," but he's doing it out of ego. So I don't know. I don't know what BlackRock is doing. I don't know who they're bidding against. I don't know the business model, but I definitely think that they are preying. Yes, I'm going to use that word on housing unaffordability in certain areas to benefit themselves for sure. Like I don't think they're going to Rosedale again and buying like multi-million dollar, like $7 million properties and renting them out. No, but they're going to like places like probably my neighborhood. I don't know, and they're going to people who are retired or like close to retirement or whatever, and they're like, "Hey, fully paid off house. Here you go. I'm going to give you 2 million for it, even though it's probably only worth like a million, million and a half. Enjoy it." And then turn around, they put some upgrades into it, and next thing you know, there's like somebody who's like short-term lease, renting it for like a year or 6 months or something. I think that's what's happening.
I guess what I was trying to say, and I worded it very poorly, is we're allowed, the middle class is getting wiped out and we're not
Yes.
addressing the core cause of why that's happening. That's what I meant.
Yeah, yeah. So I agree with you. I definitely think that is happening. And I think this is one of the reasons why it's happening. Our purchasing power is being reduced because houses are becoming more expensive. The cost of living is higher. Gas is more expensive. Food is more expensive. Everything is more expensive. So we're making X $1,000s a year, but it's buying us less of stuff. So yeah, that's what's happening. And there's other reasons for that too. Like in Canada, our manufacturing has gone down. We don't really build stuff anymore. I mean, sure we do, but like compared to our where on a relative basis, compared to let's say 30 or 40 years ago, our manufacturing capacity has gone down. Our innovation has gone down. What we've done is we're just think of it like you go to Amazon, you go to like everything is sold to us by huge conglomerates who make all that stuff in China because it's cheaper. This is what's happening. I mean, it's happening in the US as well, but let's talk about Canada. Manufacturing was specifically a very like the middle class worked in manufacturing. And I'm talking like the entire middle class, and not just like the white collar people who work like downtown, but like people who work at a plant. So I'm putting them all in the middle class. A house, at a car, like the kids went to hockey, they went on vacation. That is absolutely being suppressed and it's being wiped out. Affordability is being wiped out because of all this stuff. And manufacturing, leaving the country is one of them. Houses becoming more expensive is one of them. Cost of living is a third thing. Um, Population pressure, absolutely, right? Just the other thing too is like you think about it, like we're a big country, but our entire population, what is it? We studied this in university, I think. What is it? 85 or 90% of the Canadian population lives within 150 kilometers of the U.S. border. So we're all very much concentrated in the southern strip, southern belt of the country, right? That right there is a problem because it means that places over there are going to be more expensive to live in because there's so much population pressure. And that's something that we have not fixed over time. We need to create more industry and more places where people can live that are maybe a little bit further away so that they can attract people.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's kind of, well, it's not entirely going the opposite way, but what's happening is power is drifting from the cities to the province. So, although you could still theoretically set up new communities in the interior BC, for example, the decision making is being centralized in the cities, and the cities are making decisions. They just want to go up, like they just want to
Correct. That's
densify.
exactly it. I was waiting for you to say
Uh,
that. No, that's
yeah.
exactly it. Right. Um, but I also think that there is a Canadian cultural component to this. As a people, we're not very dynamic. We love talking about stuff. We love having spontaneous debate about everything. And yeah, sure, it's healthy. But there comes a point in time where it's like, okay, enough is enough. We need to build something. We need to solve this problem because it addresses a need. And we're not like that as a country, which is why it takes us ages to get anything done. We have lots and lots of committees and steering committees and studies and whatnot, and nothing gets built. And I actually have a very direct example about this. Like when I left so I moved here from New Delhi in the late 90s, and New Delhi did not have a subway system. Traffic was atrocious. It was just horrible trying to get around the city. Um, and Toronto had like the two lines. In the last 20 years, and I think New Delhi got it even further. So I would say in the decade between when I left, I moved here, and a decade after, New Delhi got a gigantic, very advanced, state-of-the-art subway system, and we got three new stops. So for those who live in Toronto, listen to this. There's the Bessarion line or whatever, the purple line that goes northeast Toronto. There are like four stops. It goes from I think York Mill Station all the way to Fairview Mall. So it's like four, maybe five stops. That's all we got in the first like 10 years. And now we've gotten three more stops because it goes from Downsview. Payman, remember Downsview? That was the closest one to York. You had to take the bus.
Yeah, I remember.
It's finally connected to York, and it's gone all the way up to Vaughan City Center or Vaughan Town Center, whatever. So another four stops over there. So in 25 years, we have gotten one line and maybe, let's round up, 10 new stations. Whereas New Delhi, which is, 18, 20 million people, I don't even know, bustling metropolis, quote unquote, we like to consider India to be a developing country, all this other stuff, massive population pressure. If you just Google like the Delhi metro transit system, I think it's like over 100 stops. Like there's 13 lines or something. So you got to think, it's like, how did they do it? And how were we not able to do it?
Yeah, that sounds like an entirely other episode to do.
Right. But all of this, it factors into quality of life, right? Because if we're not building things quickly enough, infrastructure, we're not solving our problems quickly enough. Goods and services and people are not going to move across the country, across cities quickly enough. And our cost of living is going to go up, and our standard of living is going to go down.
I'm always blown away. Like you look at these pictures. Like take Toronto. When they built the subway, that was like 100 years ago. You got the black and white photo of the Italian immigrant with a shovel, and they built it in like 72 hours. now, like, you want to change the tire on a bus, it takes like a prime minister's executive order.
I agree completely. Yes, it's become like that. We're so bureaucratic. So on top of that not being dynamic, we're also very bureaucratic.
So, I just wanted to end. We're almost at the end, and I was going to ask you a question. So, you mentioned how your parents, they're kind of worldly, and they've traveled. If we restrict land ownership to citizens only, what would happen if there was a backlash? Like, presumably, there's millions of Canadians that own property in like Mexico and Croatia. Like, what do you think would happen?
I don't know, but I think that there wouldn't be a huge backlash because I don't think. So two things. I don't think the properties owned in those countries, Mexico, Croatia, wherever, by Canadians is a significant portion of the overall housing stock. But more specifically, I think they only own real estate in certain parts of those countries where there isn't a lot of housing demand to begin with. So, for example, it's like, let's say there are like really, really rich Europeans, or I don't know, really rich foreigners who own a lot of like $15 million houses in like the most prestige neighborhoods in Toronto and Vancouver. I don't think that's really affecting people like you and me because we were never in the market for that. I don't think those properties are affecting 99% of Canadians, so it's not a huge deal. If you know what I mean, if that foreign home ownership in those neighborhoods were to go away, that's my take on it. Like, I don't think Canadians, I don't know, could be wrong. I don't think Canadians are owning houses in like the Etobicoke of Mexico City, or you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I've never actually been to Vancouver, but like, what is like a very middle of the road, middle class neighborhood in Vancouver? You know what I mean? Like, I just don't think so. I think it's in places like, Punta Cana, like the touristy, beachy areas, right? That's what I'm thinking. Like the Adriatic coast, the islands or whatever. Like the very prestige touristy places. That's where Canadians are owning homes in Croatia and Mexico and whatever, Central America. That's what I think.
Yeah, it'll
They're
be
not
interesting.
fundamentally altering the housing market in those countries.
And we're not going over there and buying like subsidized housing.
Well, there's that too, right? It's not like you have these Chinese billionaires or whatever, Middle Eastern billionaires coming up and buying up an entire condo in Toronto, right? Like that's not happening as far as I know. Equivalent, sorry. Yeah.
No, it's okay. Arjun, I kind of really enjoyed this conversation. It's just one average, ordinary guy and a guest.
No, two average, ordinary guys just trying to figure out how the world works. I think that's what it is. How does the world work? Featuring Peter and Arjun.
we should do a podcast together.
This goes back to undergrad. We're trying to figure things out.
You should tell your wife, honey, I'm quitting my job. We're going to do a podcast.
Full-time philosopher. She's like, that's great. Now take the garbage out. So
yeah, musician. Yeah.
There you go. No, this has been great. Thank you for having me. I think we scratched the surface on a lot of interesting things. I'm happy to talk about it further. But yeah, this is great.
All right. Well, we'll hopefully one of two things will happen. Either we'll get you back on the show, or Canada will implode. So we'll see what happens first.
We'll see what happens first. Hopefully, the former.
Yeah.
You take care. Have a great weekend. It was really good to catch up, and I wish you all the best. Thank you, Peter.
Likewise, Arjun. If I could just hold you over to after the show, but to everyone else, have a nice day. Bye.